My cheating wife opened our relationship to sleep with her lover, but he beat her and killed her. If this story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and share in the comments which city you're watching from. We'd love to know where our community is growing. I've been married for 9 years to my wife, and I really thought I'd escaped the danger zone in my marriage. I believed that after passing the initial phase, we'd continue to treat each other as people who love each other. After 9 years of marriage and more years of dating, I thought I knew this person inside and out. I knew we'd have problems here and there, but I never thought it'd be infidelity. We read these stories here all the time, and when I do, it's easy not to get too upset because I always assumed it wouldn't be something I'd have to deal with. But look at the cards I've been dealt. Life sucks. I guess whoever said never wasn't wrong. Things were good in our marriage, or so I thought. There were no recurring problems. We had financial bumps early on, but things got better and we hardly ever fought about it anymore. Over time, we understood our emotions better and stupid fights were less frequent. In the bedroom, things were also great. We always tried new things to keep the spark. For me, we had a good life and a good marriage. That's why I was completely cold when she sat down with me one day and with total naturalness said she wanted us to explore the idea of an open marriage. It came out of nowhere. In fact, we'd been intimate the night before and it was fantastic. That was the first doubt that came to my mind. I asked her if I wasn't doing my part well. She said I was and that it had nothing to do with that. I found it very hard to believe because I personally think there's no reason to want to sleep with someone else unless you're not satisfied. This is a person I never suspected of infidelity or intentions to cheat on me, and suddenly she tells me she wants to ruin our marriage and start sleeping with others just like that. I've never seen the point of that concept. What's the difference between that and simply breaking up to be single? I asked her what she thought an open marriage would bring to our union that we didn't already have. I told her that before answering, she had to ask herself if whatever she was looking for was worth the risk of what an open marriage could cause us. She said our marriage was getting old, and that's why it was at risk of becoming monotonous. No matter how much we tried to spark it up in the bedroom, she asked me to remember the excitement of when I was younger and wasn't committed to anyone. I told her she knew perfectly well I was never that kind of person, not even when I was young. Before I met her, I'd only slept with 4 people. It's not like I was the most experienced guy in that department. She told me it was my choice to feel or not feel that excitement. She said an open marriage was something purely physical and that our emotions would still belong to each other. I replied that I didn't like the sound of that because it sounded like I was being taken for a fool. I'd be the one sitting at home knowing my wife was out being serviced by other men. She said I was only seeing it from one angle because I'd have the opportunity to do exactly the same as her. That if there were negatives, she'd also have to deal with them. It all seemed very silly to me because the concept of an open relationship is something I'll simply never agree with. Some say it's about trust or keeping things fresh, but you can trust your partner without involving third parties, and you can definitely keep things fresh with just one person. I expressed my honest feelings. I felt like I wasn't doing my job well, or that she missed the life she had before committing to me. She claimed that wasn't the case. She said she simply thought it was a good thing to try, and that we could try for a month or 2 to see how we did. I pointed out another problem. She was much more likely to find people to sleep with than I was. That's how things are in the sexual market, and I told her not to try to convince herself otherwise. Any woman can walk down the street, declare she wants sex, and she'll instantly find several candidates. For a man, it'll never be like that. I'd end up struggling to find a single partner in that open marriage, while she'd have too many to count. As a man in a marriage, there should be no reason to participate in something like that unless you yourself suggest it for whatever reason. She kept insisting that I'd enjoy it and that we should try it. I asked her why she was so keen. We'd been married for 9 years, and everything had been fine all that time. I want to know why she'd never suggested it before. She said it wasn't the first time she'd thought about it, just the first time she'd talked about it. According to her, it was a common topic in videos she watched on Instagram. Although she wasn't crazy about the idea before, now she thought it'd be something interesting to try. I asked her if there was someone she'd already set her sights on, because that would make everything make sense to me. I'd understand if it was basically a way to ask permission to sleep with someone specific. She took it very badly. as if I'd just accused her of cheating on me. She said that was far from the truth and that I was basically calling her disloyal by implying something like that. I was just trying to understand why we were having this conversation and why it was so serious. She wasn't joking. I let her know I was going to think about it, because at that moment, I just wanted to get out of that situation. It was an exhausting argument, and the more we talked about it, the more I started to get upset. I made it clear that my answer was very likely to be a no, but that for her peace of mind, I'd give it serious thought. I was really going to think about it, but I knew the final answer would be negative. There was nothing appealing about that idea to me. She seemed happy enough with that answer, so I left it at that. As someone who's read many stories about wives and girlfriends asking to open a relationship, I know that never bodes well. I knew it was one of two things: where she'd already started cheating on me and wanted to find a way to legalize it, or she had someone she wanted to sleep with and needed an indirect green light. All the reasons she gave me were garbage, because I personally feel there's no sensible reason for an open relationship beyond wanting to sleep with other people because your partner isn't enough for you. That's all. If you ask me, as I had those ideas in my head, I realized the only way to find out the truth about her intentions was by checking her phone. She acted offended when I suggested there was someone else, so she wasn't going to be honest with me. A private detective would be too expensive and might not find anything, so I decided to go the classic route. About a week passed since our talk, and I still hadn't given her an answer. She'd asked me about it about 3 times, and by the third, it was clear she was starting to get irritated because I still wasn't saying anything. I ignored it, knowing my answer would only come after checking her phone. It was hard to find the perfect opportunity, but I managed one night when she was particularly tired and had some wine to help her sleep. I knew she'd sleep soundly, so as soon as I heard her light snoring, I grabbed her phone and went straight to her messages with her friends. I had to scroll back a lot because they talked a lot of nonsense, but I finally got to the point where they were talking about open relationships. Half of them weren't convinced by the idea, but the other half were, and one of those was my wife. The other 2 girls who liked it said that, as a woman, it's always a winning situation. You choose who to sleep with, and you know your husband will always be struggling to catch up to your numbers. When I scrolled further up the chat, I saw that the start of the conversation was my wife asking them what they thought about open relationships. Scrolling further down, Fabian's name appeared, and I could tell he was the person my wife had her eye on. I didn't know who he was because she'd never mentioned him until I looked up the name in her contacts. I managed to deduce he was a client of the company where she works. At first, everything was very professional, but after 3 weeks of a working relationship, she started making very subtle, flirty comments about his appearance, his height, and his body. She invited him to dinner using work as an excuse, and apparently the dinner happened. After that, she referred to the encounter jokingly as a date. It was a few days after that when she proposed the idea of an open marriage to me. It was clear what had triggered it. She kept talking to him after that. The part where everything fell apart for me was when I saw that in the messages from 2 days ago, the flow of the conversation made it clear that something had happened between them. And since I have more than 2 brain cells, it was obvious they'd slept together. I had to think back. It was the same night. She came home almost 2 hours later than usual with some excuse or other. Fabian didn't seem comfortable with what had happened. The conversation between them went like this. You have a husband, right? I do, but I don't care. What happened today was fantastic, but I do care. It's not a big deal, Fabian. We're about to open our marriage anyway. I'm not lying about that. If it's not open yet, we shouldn't have done that. It wasn't right. She didn't reply for almost 30 minutes before typing. It's fine. That doesn't change the fact that I loved it, and I'm willing to repeat it if you ever stop being so dramatic. That snippet of conversation broke me. It was bad enough that she proposed an open marriage, which already made me want a divorce. But to see that she asked, and without waiting for an answer, went and did it. It showed me how stupid I was to even consider letting it slide. At the end of the day, you've always been right. A woman asking for an open marriage is always the sign that everything's over. I documented everything, including the chat with her friends in the group, and I'm going to do the same when I confront her. I don't know what that moment will be like, but this is over. For now, I'm going to focus on getting a divorce lawyer, and I'll deal with what comes next. I wasn't overly controlling or unadventurous, I was simply a reasonable and loyal partner. The only person who acted selfishly and recklessly was her. Documenting everything and preparing for divorce is exactly what I should do, because this isn't a misunderstanding, it's a red line she crossed. Update 1. This is an update to my previous post about my wife asking me to open the marriage, and despite me thinking about it, going ahead and sleeping with the person she wanted. That guy, Fabian, was the only reason she proposed the open relationship. My first move was to find a lawyer. I had to shop around a bit because I wanted someone I could fully trust, and fortunately I found him, although it cost me a little more than I expected. What cost me even more was hiring a private detective, because I needed more information about Fabian. His first name and phone number weren't enough to find anything online. Thanks to the detective, I located him almost immediately. I got his full name, his address, and his workplace. I almost made the mistake of going to look for him at his house, but luckily common sense won, and I went to his office. He held a high position in a construction company. I was able to connect the dots based on what my wife had told me about her recent problems at work. I knew they had a construction company as a client, and I assumed she dealt directly with Fabian. I decided to go to his workplace because it seemed safer for a confrontation. The fact that he'd felt bad after what happened gave me hope he was a sensible guy. Confronting him wasn't in my original plans, but I realized I had to. I made sure to go with my phone recording. I arrived at the office, asked to speak with him, and made it clear that although I didn't have an appointment, it'd be in his best interest to see me. He came out to see who I was, and when I shook his hand and introduced myself as the husband, I saw the shock on his face. He suggested we talk in his office, and I accepted. The first thing I did was make it clear that I wasn't there to fight or make a scene. I told him my wife had asked me for an open marriage, that I still hadn't given her an answer, and that even so she'd slept with him. I told him I didn't respect him, even though he'd acknowledged that what they did was wrong. Although he knew she was married before sleeping with her, the responsibility of being loyal wasn't his, but hers. I went only to let him know I was already aware of everything. He apologized profusely. At the end of the day, he's still the guy who slept with my wife, so my sympathy has limits, but he was a good guy. Given the circumstances, I told him I was going to need his help. He wasn't to tell my wife I'd been there until after I served her the papers. He said no problem because their relationship was already purely professional. After he rejected her, she became excessively formal and started treating him arrogantly whenever she could. I also asked him a big favor to end the business relationship with her company. He said that would be difficult. I replied that it was in his best interest, because otherwise I'd expose their affair both at his company and at hers, which would inevitably end up breaking the employment bond. Anyway, I was basically threatening him, but he didn't make a fuss. He said he'd think about it, and I left it at that. About 6 days later, my wife came home in a horrible mood. I eventually found out that one of her company's biggest clients had left them, and practically for no reason. She said it was because someone there didn't like her for some reason. I asked her why someone wouldn't like her, but she didn't elaborate. She was trying to cover it up. I rubbed salt in the wound because I had the divorce papers served to her at work the next day. She called me almost 20 times before she got home, and when she did, she was on the verge of physical violence. She threw the papers in my face, and as soon as I stood up, she started pushing me and invading my space. She kept asking me what I was doing, but she wouldn't even let me answer. I managed to start recording in the middle of all that. I told her she'd been sleeping with a client and that she was the one who was wrong, so there was no point in her acting aggressively. I think it hit her that I knew. I clarified that Fabian hadn't told me directly, but that I found out after her stupid open marriage trick. I let her know that everything made sense to me and that she didn't need to try to explain herself. So, why are you being so dramatic? Seriously, you had to have the papers served to me at work, she said. I'll never understand why women, when caught cheating, focus on everything but the main point. They just want to find something to feel like they're right, as if that's going to save them. I ignored that and told her she'd cheated on me, and that was the only thing she should be worried about. Our marriage was going to end, and it was her fault. She could have gotten away with just asking for the open relationship, but she had to ruin everything. She tried to argue with me, but I left her talking to herself because, truth be told, I had no interest in getting into a long fight over something she'd already done and couldn't be remedied. I wasn't interested in any why. We're already a bit far into the divorce process, so I hope to have a final update soon. For now, I'm out of the house, and that's enough for me. Update 2. I'm officially a divorced man, and I'm happy to say it. I'll get straight to the point. She kept the house. My mistake for letting her live there after the confrontation, but I don't care too much. I earn more than her, but fortunately, I managed to get rid of alimony, which I'm very happy about. I thank my lawyer for using my evidence to justify why she didn't deserve a penny of my money. Now, the part one like best. I asked Fabian if he was willing to admit to her company that they'd slept together, but he wanted nothing to do with it. I don't blame him. Instead, I used my own evidence, and luckily, I had plenty. It wasn't hard at all to prove that she and Fabian had a sexual relationship. I sent everything in an email to her boss. I'm sure that before starting the official investigation, he gave her a heads up because she attacked me via text messages. She said I wanted to ruin her life, as if it wasn't already difficult enough for her. I replied that she brought it on herself. Now she has to pay a mortgage for 2. She alone doesn't receive alimony, and her job was hanging by a thread. I was right to worry because they ended up firing her. The company was too big to deal with someone who slept with important clients on a whim. The worst part for her was that they believed the sudden departure of the construction company had to do with her failed affair. All her effort in that company disappeared just like that, the same way my effort in the marriage disappeared. I don't feel bad about it at all. Now all she does on social media is complain. I've seen the dig she throws at me, but most of her posts are complaints about how life sucks and how hard work is useless. Hard work is very useful, but when you mix it with dishonesty, sometimes you deserve for everything to fall apart. The best part is that while she's doing worse, I'm doing better. Can't complain about that, right? Be faithful and life might turn out well for you. Losing her job, her reputation, and her marriage all at the same time is what happens when you act despicable and assume the world won't notice. She can post all the sad quotes she wants about how unfair life is, but the truth is she built the rubble she's standing on herself. Every flirtation and every lie piled up until the castle of lies fell. It's not that life is cruel, it's that she was terrible at making decisions. Final update. Hello, everyone. If you thought the firing and divorce were the end, reality showed me that karma has a very twisted way of finishing its work. Things escalated in a way I never imagined. And although our relationship ended badly, the outcome was truly tragic. Weeks after she lost her job, reality hit her hard. Without my salary and without hers, keeping up with the house mortgage was impossible. Desperate and out of options, she had to sell the property in a hurry, accepting a much lower offer than it was worth just to have some cash. On the other hand, Fabian didn't fare well either. The construction company, to avoid a bigger scandal of inappropriate client relationships, decided to cut him off, and he was fired. It turned out the guy was a hardened womanizer and a compulsive gambler, something my ex completely ignored in her blindness from the affair. Since both were on the streets and out of work, they made the worst possible decision. They decided to move in together with the money she got from the house sale. They didn't last a month. The money from the house sale disappeared in a week. Fabian, in his delusion, stole her savings and spent them in casinos, justifying that he'd double it to save them, but he lost everything. Furthermore, she discovered that while they were living together, he was still seeing other women. When my ex finally confronted him, the situation turned dark. A violent fight ensued in which Fabian lost control. He gave her a brutal beating, venting all his frustration at having lost his status and his money. She, shattered, miraculously managed to escape and crawl to her parents' house, where she confessed all the hell she was living. Her parents, with whom I always maintained a good relationship, despite everything, called me immediately and told me everything while filing the report. The police arrested Fabian that same night. He's now behind bars. However, the physical damage was devastating. My ex-wife had to be urgently hospitalized, fighting for her life due to severe internal injuries. I spent days in a state of shock waiting for news. Finally, Her father called me with a broken voice to give me the definitive news. She couldn't resist and passed away in the hospital. It's an ending I wouldn't wish on anyone. Because she died as a result of her injuries, the charges against Fabian have been upgraded to aggravated homicide, which ensures he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. She sought an adventure to escape routine and ended up finding her own destruction at the hands of the man for whom she risked everything. Thanks for accompanying me through this process. It's been a roller coaster of emotions, but today I can finally say that this chapter, however tragic, has closed forever.